everyone, my name is Alicia. I'm a flute player with the Los Angeles Symphonic Winds, and today I'm going to introduce you to the flute. The flute is an ancient instrument that has been found through most cultures throughout history. In fact, you probably even know some famous flute players from mythology. There is the Grecian god Pan. He made the flute out of his beloved Syrinx, who had been turned into a reed. There is Kokopelli, the Hopi deity who played his flute to bring about fertility and to bring in spring. The muse of lyric poetry plays flute. The Indian god Krishna plays his flute to awaken divine love in humans. And this is really what I would like to share about flute today, is that flute awakens the qualities of love in us. It really centers us in our heart. And my hope is that by the end of this little lesson today, that you will have that experience. Let's begin with a few technicalities about the flute. The flute is a wind instrument, which simply means that the sound is produced using air. And specifically, the kind of wind instrument it is a woodwind instrument. And that is because woodwinds were originally made from wood. Some woodwinds still are made from wood. But the flute that we play today, its predecessor, which is like the fife that was used in military, was made of wood. So flute is a wind instrument, and specifically a woodwind instrument. We can call this a number of different things. We can call this the silver flute. We can call it the standard Western flute. We can call it the transverse flute because we play it out to the side as opposed to out to the front. If you go to a wind ensemble concert or an orchestra concert, you will hear flute and other members of the flute family. There's also the piccolo, which in Italian you may know means small or little, and it's literally like a little flute. And it plays an octave higher than the standard flute. You might also hear the alto flute. Alto flute has a larger bore and is longer than the flute. And it plays lower. It actually plays in a different key. Flute plays in the key of C, but an alto flute plays in the key of G. There are other flutes as well that they get bigger and bigger as they get lower and lower. They are less common and you're less likely to see them. Originally, flutes have been made from things like bamboo, wood, clay, and reeds. Nowadays, the standard Western flute is made of, could be brass or an alloy with a silver plating. It could be solid silver, and it can even be made of more precious metals like gold or platinum. And I'm even seeing a resurgence of flutes again made of wood. So let's start. We're going to take a look at the flute, and I want to introduce you to the parts of the flute. Down here at the bottom, we have what is called the foot joint. And then this long piece in the middle is called the body of the flute. And the body and the foot, you're going to see keys, and also under the keys, under most keys, you will see tone holes. There are 16 tone holes on the flute. Up here we have the head joint. The top of the head joint is actually stopped with a cork, and that's to prevent air from escaping out that end. We have this raised portion here that is called the lip plate. And then here we have the embouchure hole, and that is where the wind or the breath enters the flute. And while we're here, we can use this to now talk about how sound is produced on the flute. All the sound on the flute is actually produced on the head joint itself. In fact, if I take the head joint off and play it by itself, I will be able to make a tone. This is where the sound comes from. The air blows over and into the embouchure hole, and it actually hits the sharp edge of the embouchure, and it bounces off and it vibrates throughout the tubing. I know that's not a very scientific explanation, but I'm a musician and not a physicist, so that's what you get. The direction and the intensity of the air affect things like pitch, which is how high or low the sound is. It affects timbre, and that's the quality of the sound. Like you could have an airy timbre or a bright timbre or a dark timbre. And it also affects dynamics, which is how loud or soft a sound is. So we start off by making the pitch in the head joint. We also have to change pitches, right? That's how we get a melody. Notes go up, notes go down, they are high and they are low. And that is where the keys and the tone holes come in. I want to show you real quick a different kind of a flute. This is called a bansuri, and you would see it in India. And it's kind of the basic model of what, the Western flute is. You have the embouchure hole here, and you have the tone holes. Here, unlike the silver flute, the tone holes are covered with the fingers. But the principle I would like you to see is that when we cover the tone holes, what we do is we make the tubing longer or shorter, right? If we have no holes covered, the tube is about that long. As we start covering holes, we make the tubing longer or shorter. And the same thing is done on the silver flute. We can make the tubing shorter and we can make the tubing longer as we cover up more tone holes. So a flute, this kind of flute is used in orchestra actually for this very reason. If you may remember that I told you there were 16 tone holes in the flute. In other flutes, like the bansuri, there are less. But the flute has more, and because of all the mechanisms of the keys, we don't have to have, 16 fingers to cover them all up. What this does, it enables the flute to play in any key. With the less evolved flutes, you have to have different flutes in different keys to play whatever scale you're going to play. But in flute, you can actually, you have the flexibility to play in any key. So the flute plays 3 to 3.5 octaves, and we divide those octaves up into what we call registers. There's the high register, and the high register is very bright. You will hear a high register in a lot of orchestral playing because that is the sound that can carry through the rest of the orchestra. Flute is not necessarily a very loud instrument, but the quality of that high register carries it through the other sounds of the orchestra. You also have the middle register. The middle register is a little sweet, it's nice and easy to play on the flute. And you might hear those things in an orchestra maybe when things are a little bit quieter or if it's part of a chord pad. And then we have what is called the low register on the flute. You'll hear this more in solo flute playing, although there are some beautiful solos for orchestra in the low register. If you know Smetana's Moldau opens up with a beautiful flute solo in the very low register, or in Stravinsky's Petrushka, there's a beautiful solo that starts on one of the lowest notes. But to be fair, in those two solos, nobody else in the orchestra is playing because you wouldn't be able to hear them without the silence around it. I'd like to play a little bit of a piece for you. It is written by C.P.E. Bach. It is the Sonata for Solo Flute, and I think it's just a great example of how a composer can use registers to create different voices in music. In this excerpt, you'll hear the low register, the middle register, a little bit of the high register coming out, and you can hear how they create conversations with each other. So here is just a little bit of the Sonata for Solo Flute by C.P.E. Bach. All right, one last thing I'd like to teach you about flute today is one other way that we can add color and phrasing to our flute playing, and that is with the concept of tonguing or slurring. Tonguing or slurring helps to craft phrases. What slurring is uninterrupted air as we change notes. Sounds a little bit like this. And what tonguing does is the tongue interrupts the air. It sounds a little like this. And you can use the tongue to create even more space between the notes, like this. What tonguing is, well, it's literally you're using your tongue to stop the air. Use the tip of your tongue, and when you're learning to play flute, your teacher will tell you to say t, 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 because the tip of the tongue hitting the hard palate above the teeth is what makes the air stop. Flute actually has this great ability that other woodwinds don't necessarily have because they have the reed in their mouth. We have the ability to do what is called double tonguing, which can, enable the flute player to play very fast. And what double tonguing is using the tip of your tongue, t, but also using the middle of your tongue against the roof of the mouth. K, t, k. So when you have the two ends of the flute interrupting the air, at a very fast rate, that's how you can tongue very quickly and play fast passages. I will not be doing that for you today, but I am going to play a little bit of a piece. This is Tambourin by Gluck, and you'll hear some beautiful upper register and middle register, but you'll be able to hear how the tonguing creates like a buoyancy in this piece, a lightness and a brightness. Here's Tambourin by Gluck. I'd like to play one more piece for you today. If you remember at the very beginning of this presentation, I told you that flute brings about feelings of love and it centers us in our heart. And this next piece is an absolutely beautiful example of that. This is the concertino written by Cécile Chaminade. Chaminade was a female composer in the late 1800s, early 1900s at the French Conservatory, and she actually wrote this piece, according to James Galway, as a wedding proposal, a marriage proposal for her fiancé. And you can really hear the qualities, that earnest love in this piece, because it's in the sweet middle register, a little bit up in the high register, and lots of slurring, so uninterrupted love, uninterrupted phrases, much like uninterrupted love. So this is the last thing I'll play for you. This is just the very beginning phrases of the concertino by Chaminade. And that is my presentation for today. I hope you enjoyed learning about the flute. I hope to see all of you in the concert hall soon, and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.